I was still skimming the onboarding agenda when Ross Bexley leaned back in his chair and said, "Let's not waste everyone's time. We're terminating you. You're not a fit for where this company is going." He said it casually, almost bored, like he was canceling a meeting room reservation. Orientation hadn't even warmed the room. My login spinner was still spinning. Ross didn't look at my resume. He didn't ask my name again. He glanced at HR and added, "We're resetting leadership culture. Old habits. Old people, it's all drag." The word people landed with deliberate contempt. He smiled afterward, satisfied with himself. "I hope you understand how I feel and will continue to listen. I'll tell you my story in detail. But hey, is it very cold where you live? Please tell me the temperature. Oh, and I'd also like to know your lucky number. Please leave it in the comments as a greeting." And this is what happened. Ross Bexley, interim CEO by inheritance and timing, wore authority like a costume. I wore none of it. I'd been brought in to stabilize operations, calm investors, and keep fragile systems from collapsing under ambition. He was brought in to look decisive. He spoke in slogans. I worked in outcomes. He believed titles replaced memory. HR went silent. A junior rep stared at her tablet, frozen between policy and fear. Ross waved off security. He wanted control, not procedure. He explained that decisive leaders made clean cuts, that sentiment slowed progress, that the future required courage. He never said the word process. He never said board. I didn't argue. Shock has a taste metallic. Sharp and humiliation follows quietly, without drama. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and handed back the badge I'd been issued minutes earlier. Ross watched closely, mistaking restraint for weakness. He needed resistance to feel powerful. Instead, I said one sentence, calm, measured. "Tell the board I'll be watching." The room exhaled. Ross smiled, relieved. He thought silence meant defeat. He thought composure meant surrender. He thought this was his first win. Fired before coffee cooled. Fired before access was granted. Fired because someone confused noise with power. Ross Bexley believed he'd erased a problem. He had no idea he'd just met one. Before we continue, I want to share a small note. This story is partially fictionalized and uses artificial intelligence to help clarify ideas and create a deeper emotional impact. I hope it resonates with you, and if it doesn't, feel free to step away, get some rest, and take care of yourself. Your health matters more than any story. I didn't always sit quietly in the background. There were years when this company was little more than contracts held together by trust and luck. And I was the one writing the language that kept it alive. I built the legal spine, negotiated investor protections, and closed gaps no one else bothered to see. Every crisis had my fingerprints on it, even when my name never appeared in announcements. I chose equity over titles because titles evaporate, shares don't, while others chased promotions. I took percentages, small pieces that compounded into leverage, when audits threatened exposure. I rewrote frameworks overnight. When investors panicked, I stabilized votes with clauses they barely read. I didn't need applause. I needed control. Ross Bexley despised that kind of presence. He called it baggage. He hated anything that reminded him the company existed before his authority. To him, experience was obstruction, and memory was an inconvenience that slowed his momentum. Erasing people like me made him feel modern. He made sure HR heard it. "We're moving forward, not backward," Ross said, glancing at me as if I were outdated software. The insult wasn't loud. It was deliberate. He wanted witnesses. I absorbed it the way I always had, storing the resentment instead of releasing it. Outrage is loud. Preparation is quiet. As Ross congratulated himself for cutting loose dead weight, my mind drifted elsewhere. Past the meeting room, past the insult. I remembered a clause I wrote for men like Ross, disguised as leadership alone. The moment I stepped outside the building, the noise fell away and something colder took its place. Anger would have been easier. Panic would have been expected. Instead, I felt clarity. Ross Bexley had acted without authority, And that single mistake gave me control. I didn't rush. I didn't call anyone to complain. I opened my secure folder and began doing what I had always done best. The clause had a forgettable name and an even duller heading. It was designed that way, buried inside the shareholder agreement. It allowed a majority owner to trigger an emergency governance reset if a non-equity executive terminated a corporate officer without board approval. I had written it years ago. After watching another arrogant heir confuse confidence with competence, no one objected back then. They trusted me to protect them. I activated it with 3 steps. First, I filed the trigger notice, signed, dated, and verified. Second, I attached the termination memo Ross had proudly issued, complete with his signature and HR acknowledgement. Third, I sent the packet to everyone who mattered: board members, general counsel, lead investors. Each email subject line was identical: emergency shareholder action, immediate review required. There was no emotion in the process, just sequence, just confirmation receipts appearing one by one. I watched the timestamps stack neatly, each one tightening the net. Someone replied within minutes. Confused. Another asked if this was a drill. I didn't answer. The clause didn't require explanation, only compliance. A legal assistant called Cassidy. "Can you clarify what this is about?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Read page 14, then call your counsel." The line went silent. The clock had started the moment the filings went out. 3 hours. Not symbolic, not flexible. The agreement required an emergency board session within that window, or voting authority reverted automatically. There was no pause button, no polite delay for misunderstanding. That was the point. As the minutes passed, messages multiplied, investors asking why they were being summoned, lawyers requesting confirmation of authenticity. One board member wrote, "Is Ross aware of this?" I replied with a single sentence. "He will be." Control isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It moves while everyone else is still arguing about whether it should exist. Ross had power only as long as people believed in it. I had leverage written into law. An hour in, the company's internal counsel sent a brief note: "We advise all executives to refrain from unilateral decisions until further notice." That was the first crack. Another followed when IT asked legal whether they should proceed with account revocations. Legal responded, "Do nothing." I imagined Ross in his office, confident, oblivious, convinced silence meant compliance. He had no idea a countdown was running in rooms he wasn't allowed into. 2 hours left. Board calendars began clearing. Assistants canceled lunches and flights. One investor finally understood and sent a single word: "understood." I closed my laptop and waited. By the time Ross learned what he had triggered, the process would already be beyond him. The clause didn't care about apologies. It didn't recognize authority that wasn't earned. It only measured time: 3 hours. That was all it took to turn his decision into my jurisdiction. Ross Bexley celebrated like a man who believed the story was already over, while legal clocks quietly ticked elsewhere. He sat in his glass office drafting a LinkedIn post about decisive leadership. He typed slowly, savoring each word, polishing phrases about bold action and cultural renewal. He paused to reread sentences aloud, nodding as if an invisible audience were applauding. He wrote that leadership meant making hard choices without sentiment. He added that the company was entering a new chapter. Hashtags followed: carefully chosen, vision, momentum, courage. Ross smiled at the screen. Convinced this was the moment his authority became permanent, he had fired someone on day one. And in his mind, that was proof of strength. From his desk, he issued orders with casual confidence. "Deactivate her access immediately." He told HR, full sweep, email, systems, everything. He leaned back as if the matter were administrative. Already forgetting my name, to Ross. People were tabs you closed once they slowed your browser. HR forwarded the request. IT received it. And then everything stalled, down the hall. The IT director opened the internal registry. The one executives never bothered to learn existed. It wasn't flashy. No dashboards, no slogans, just columns, permissions, and quiet authority. My name sat there without decoration, embedded deep in the structure Ross had never explored. Primary legal signatory, shareholder registry control, compliance authorization. The director frowned, refreshed the screen, then checked again. He didn't respond to Ross. He didn't push a button. Instead, he stood up, carried his laptop to legal, and said carefully, "If I lock her out, we lose access to the cap table, investor portals, and automated filings." Legal didn't look surprised. They looked tired. "Do nothing," counsel said. "Absolutely nothing." Meanwhile, Ross grew impatient. He sent another message. "Why isn't this done?" he asked, irritation leaking through. He added a smiley face, as if that softened authority. It didn't. He returned to LinkedIn, adjusted his wording, and added a line about accountability. He hovered over the post button, enjoying the pause. Power, to Ross, was performance. Silence meant obedience, across the building. Emails began circulating that didn't include him. Calendars shifted. Meetings appeared without explanation. A junior analyst whispered, "Something's happening," and no one corrected him. Ross noticed small things first. His expense approval stalled. A document wouldn't sign. A dashboard showed limited access. He laughed it off, blaming system lag. He told his assistant, "Have IT fix it." IT didn't. By the time Ross realized no one was responding, his celebration had cooled into confusion. He refreshed inboxes, checked permissions, and finally called IT directly. The answer was polite and brief. "We're waiting on legal," he was told. That was the moment the irony sharpened. Ross had tried to erase me with a keystroke, only to discover the system recognized me as its anchor. He had authority on paper, but control lived elsewhere. I imagined him staring at his screen, wondering why nothing moved when he spoke. The post remained unpublished. The champagne stayed unopened. He had fired an employee. He hadn't touched the owner. Ross never understood the difference. He mistook visibility for dominance and assumed silence meant compliance. He didn't know that the quiet rooms were where decisions hardened into fact. While he rehearsed speeches about leadership, the company was already slipping beyond his reach, somewhere between unanswered emails and delayed approvals. A thin crack formed in his certainty. He didn't panic yet. Men like Ross rarely do. They assume correction will arrive on its own. They assume the world works the way it always has for them. It didn't. The system didn't respond to tone or pedigree. It responded to structure, and structure remembered who built it. Ross was celebrating an ending. He had no idea he was standing in the opening act of something far more final, and the audience was already seated, watching closely. Now, the shift was subtle at first. The kind of disruption executives blame on bad software or impatient assistants. Ross Bexley tried to approve a routine vendor extension, and the system stalled. He refreshed, clicked again, frowned. "Send it back to me," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. The document never returned signed. Minutes later, another approval failed, then another. Budget authorizations lingered in pending status. Hiring requests froze. Ross blamed IT, then finance, then blamed no one allowed and paced instead. Authority, he believed, only needed repetition. If he said it again, louder, the machine would comply. It didn't. From my side of the silence, the pattern was clear. Systems don't respond to titles. They respond to permissions, keys, and legal bindings written long before anyone starts giving orders. Ross had inherited a chair, not the wiring beneath it, inside the legal department. The mood changed quickly. Messages came in from operations asking why approvals were stalling. IT flagged conflicts they had never seen before. One analyst asked, "Why does her name keep appearing at the top of every dependency list?" No one answered him directly. The general counsel did. She sent a short directive, stripped of tone and decoration. "Do not modify, suspend, or restrict Cassidy Nolan's access under any circumstances." It went to IT compliance, security, and HR. It was not a suggestion. It was protection. Ross noticed the shift when his assistant hesitated. Legal says they need clarification. She offered carefully. Ross laughed once, sharp and dismissive. Clarification from who, he asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Emails stopped including him. Meetings moved without explanation. Doors that usually opened with a nod now came with pauses. Ross attempted to override a contract approval himself and received a denial message he had never seen before. He stared at the screen as if it had insulted him personally. "Fix this!" He snapped into the phone. "I'm the CEO." On the other end, a calm voice replied. "For now." That word landed harder than any insult. "For now" implied expiration. "For now" suggested a clock Ross hadn't noticed ticking. Across the company, anxiety spread like static. People whispered in hallways, careful not to attach names. Someone said legal had locked down the cap table. Someone else said investors were calling directly. A finance director quietly canceled a presentation and shut her office door. Ross tried to reassert control by issuing another directive. He demanded full deactivation of my credentials. The request bounced back within minutes, marked unresolved. Legal added a note, pending review. That was when Ross's phone vibrated. It wasn't an internal number. It wasn't saved. He answered anyway, expecting deference. Instead, he listened. His posture changed first, then his expression. The voice on the line was steady, seasoned, unimpressed. "Who exactly did you fire?" the investor asked. Ross didn't answer immediately. He glanced around his office as if someone might rescue him. The silence stretched. Heavy and unmistakable. "That's what I thought." The voice continued. "You should sit tight." The call ended. Ross stood still, phone in hand, authority leaking out of him in quiet increments. He finally understood something fundamental. The company wasn't resisting him. It was bypassing him. Panic doesn't arrive as screaming. It arrives as gaps in response, in acknowledgement, in certainty. Ross felt it then, spreading outward as systems refused his commands and people followed instructions he hadn't given. By the time he looked up from his desk, the machine he thought he ran was already running without him. And somewhere inside that machinery, my name remained untouched, exactly where it had always belonged. He sensed the shift when explained it. Confidence drained slowly, replaced by a dull awareness that rules existed beyond his voice. Every delay confirmed it. Every unanswered message reinforced it. He had demanded obedience and received process. That was worse. Process doesn't flinch. It doesn't care who you think you are. It simply executes what was written. Ross had never bothered to read those words. I had. And now they were moving. Quietly, efficiently, carrying his authority away piece by piece, until nothing familiar answered him anymore. Except the growing realization that panic had a direction. The invitation didn't come with an explanation. It arrived as a calendar override, marked mandatory, tagged urgent, and sent to every director within minutes. By the time I logged in, assistants were canceling flights, lawyers were dialing in early, and the building felt tighter, as if the air itself had been audited. I wasn't in the room yet, but I didn't need to be. I listened through updates, timestamps, and the nervous precision of people who know the rules just changed. The chair opened the session without pleasantries. "We are convened under emergency authority," he said. No one asked why. They already knew. Folders opened, screens shared, legal set the frame. This meeting concerns an unauthorized termination and its downstream implications. The phrase downstream implications did heavy work. It meant exposure, liability, and names on documents that would not enjoy daylight. Someone asked, "Is this theoretical counsel answered?" "No." Another asked, "Is this reversible counsel paused?" Then said, "No." The room went quiet in a way that only lawyers recognize, the sound of risk becoming personal. Then the cap table appeared, not the version executives see in presentations, rounded and friendly. The real one, decimal points intact, voting classes visible, transfer history scrolling like a confession. I could picture faces leaning forward, hands still, breathing shallow. The chair cleared his throat. "Let's be precise," he said. "Who currently holds voting control?" The analyst hesitated, then highlighted a row. My name filled the screen. Cassidy Nolan, 65%. Voting! Silence hardened. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." Legal didn't correct them. He only said, "It is." Questions collided. Since when? How? Why didn't we know? Council answered in order. Since year 7. Through negotiated grants. Documented. Filed. Reviewed. Each word landed like a stamp. I joined then. Not theatrically, just present. "You knew," I said evenly. "You just never looked." No one argued. The chair nodded once, conceding the point. They asked about authority. I explained without heat. Emergency clauses don't remove you. They pause unearned power. Someone asked about Ross. I replied. He acted without a vote. That was enough. A director tried to soften it. "We can discuss intent." I shook my head. "Intent doesn't cure breach." The lawyer murmured agreement. The clock was acknowledged. 3 hours from trigger. 40 minutes remained. Decisions had to be logged. Motions drafted. The board shifted from disbelief to procedure, because procedure is how fear pretends to be calm. The chair summarized. Control rests with the majority shareholder pending review. He looked at me. "That's you." No applause followed. Only pens moving, keys tapping, signatures lining up. Tension didn't break. It settled. When the screen dimmed. The truth stayed bright. The company hadn't changed hands. It had been revealed. And every person in that room understood the same thing at once. The emergency wasn't coming. It had already arrived. They didn't ask me to celebrate. They asked me to decide. Council outlined immediate steps, temporary freezes, and disclosure duties, all spoken carefully, as if volume could trigger consequences. I authorized continuity measures, limited only to compliance and payroll. Nothing that could be framed as retaliation. Document everything. I said, "Assume discovery." Heads nodded. The board understood that restraint was now strength. One director finally asked the question behind every other one. "What happens to Ross?" I answered without pleasure. "He waits." Waiting. I explained. Was not punishment. It was governance. It allowed facts to stand on their own weight. It prevented stories from outrunning filings. It protected the company from itself. As we closed, the chair reminded everyone of confidentiality. No leaks, no heroics, just minutes, motions, and counsel. When the call ended, I remained still, letting the silence confirm what the numbers had declared. Ownership isn't dramatic, it's cumulative. Outside the frame, phones would buzz and rumors would sprint. Inside, the record was clean. 65% didn't shout. It compelled, and once compelled, it didn't need to explain itself. That reality settled permanently, rewriting hierarchies, expectations, and futures, while procedure, not ego, dictated every remaining move from this point forward. The moment Ross realized the room would not bend, his voice changed, confidence cracked into volume. He leaned forward, palms flat on the table, and said loudly, "This is a legal ambush. You set this up." He pointed across the room, not at me directly, but close enough to feel personal. "You don't get to hijack a company because you're bitter." I watched him unravel without interrupting. Desperation has a rhythm. It accelerates, stumbles, then repeats itself as accusation. Ross threatened lawsuits first. Against me, against the board, against anyone who allowed this meeting to exist. "My attorneys will bury this," he said. "You think a clause written years ago overrides executive authority?" The general counsel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She opened the agreement and read aloud. Careful and precise. Per Section 17. Subsection C, she began. Any executive termination executed without board approval by a non-equity appointee triggers immediate suspension of interim authority. Ross tried to interrupt. She kept reading. Suspension is automatic upon filing. She continued. Not discretionary. Not reviewable in advance. Ross laughed sharply. Then we rescind, he said. I retract the termination. He said it like a reset button had always been there. There is no rescission, counsel replied. The clause does not permit reversal once activated. Ross's face flushed. That's absurd, he snapped. You can't freeze a CEO over paperwork. The chair finally spoke. You are not frozen, he said evenly. You are suspended pending review. Ross turned to me then, eyes searching for leverage. You want revenge, he said. Say it. I shook my head. This isn't revenge. I replied, It's governance. He pushed back his chair. Standing too fast. You think owning shares makes you untouchable? He demanded. I'll go public. I'll drag this into court. His threats grew louder, less specific, more frantic. The room stayed still. Panic hates witnesses who don't react. Counsel flipped another page. The filing timestamp predates your attempted retraction, she said. It has been distributed to investors and logged. At this point, authority reverts by operation of contract. Ross opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. Who approved this? He asked. You did, she answered. When you signed the agreement. That landed harder than anything else. Ross stared at the document like it had betrayed him. This is entrapment, he muttered. The chair corrected him. This is enforcement. Ross's last move was emotional. He appealed to relationships, to loyalty, to optics. We can handle this quietly, he said, lowering his voice. We don't need to destroy reputations. I met his eyes. You already tried to destroy one, I said, quietly. The room exhaled. Counsel closed the folder. For the record, she said, the suspension is now in effect. She looked at Ross. Your authority is paused. Ross sank back into his chair. The fight drained out of him, leaving disbelief behind. So that's it, he asked. The chair nodded. For now. Ross didn't understand the finality. He kept searching for an exit. A loophole. A favor. There wasn't one. The clause had done exactly what it was designed to do. It stopped motion. It froze power. It removed the illusion of control. As the meeting moved on without him, Ross sat silent, no longer directing, only observing. He had entered the room as a leader. He remained as a witness. And the most devastating part was this: nothing he said could undo it. The clause had no undue function. No apology, no lawsuit, no threat could rewind time. He had crossed a line written for men exactly like him. And now he was learning the cost of assuming rules only matter when you read them. He stared at the ceiling, breathing hard, realizing authority evaporates fastest when it is borrowed, not owned, and that every sound in the room now belonged to procedure. Not him, while time kept moving without mercy. The hallway outside the boardroom was louder than the room itself. Phones buzzed, shoes shifted, voices lowered when I passed. I didn't rush. I didn't slow down either. I walked the way someone walks when timing no longer belongs to them. No badge stopped me. No assistant asked my name. Security looked up, hesitated, then looked away. That was the first signal. Power announces itself when it's insecure. Real power recognizes its own. Inside. The boardroom had settled into an unnatural stillness. Chairs were filled, folders aligned, screens dark but ready. Conversations ended the moment I crossed the threshold. Not because I demanded attention, but because attention had already decided where it belonged. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't need to. Every person in that room had just spent the last hour staring at my name in legal documents they suddenly wished they'd read sooner. My presence wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. I took 2 steps in and stopped. Not because anyone blocked me, but because the room shifted around that pause. No one spoke. The chair cleared his throat and thought better of it. Legal counsel closed a folder she hadn't realized was still open. Ross Bexley sat rigid, hands clasped too tightly, eyes following me like he was trying to calculate distance and leverage at the same time. He looked smaller than he had earlier, not defeated, disoriented. The difference mattered. I moved again. Each step felt measured, not for effect, but because no one interrupted it. Assistants didn't rush to offer water. No one gestured toward a seat. The protocol had broken down. And everyone knew it. At the head of the table, a chair remained empty. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't staged. It was simply unoccupied, untouched since the meeting began. A nameplate rested on the polished surface, turned slightly inward, as if waiting to be claimed. I didn't look at it right away. I set my folder down first, square with the table's edge, aligned without thinking. Order has habits. Then I lifted my eyes. The chair noticed my glance and nodded once. Subtle, almost apologetic. He didn't invite me to sit. He didn't need to. The room had already accepted the correction. I didn't sit. I'll stand, I said quietly. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. Sitting implies permission. I wasn't there to ask for any. Legal counsel shifted, ready to resume procedure, but hesitated. The room waited. Silence stretched, not awkward, not tense, just complete, the kind that only exists when hierarchy realigns. Ross finally spoke. "This is highly irregular," he said. Voice controlled but strained. He was testing whether sound still carried authority. I turned toward him. "So was my termination," I replied. No one reacted. No gasps. No murmurs. The words didn't need reinforcement. They landed and stayed. The chair exhaled slowly. "We're prepared to continue," he said, choosing neutrality over resistance. I nodded. "Then continue," from the corner of my eye. I saw Ross grip the edge of the table, knuckles pale. He wanted a confrontation. He wanted noise. Noise had always worked for him before. Instead, he got process. Counsel began reading the next item, but her tone had changed. Less explanation, more confirmation. She was no longer guiding the room. She was documenting it. I listened without interrupting. Control doesn't require commentary. It requires presence. When the cap table reappeared briefly, no one needed it explained again. The numbers had already done their work. 65% doesn't argue. It waits. A director asked a procedural question. Careful, respectful. I answered simply. Another asked about continuity. I responded with parameters, not promises. Payroll, compliance, client obligations, nothing discretionary, everything traceable. Ross opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing left that the room would accept. I felt the shift complete itself. Not dramatic, not victorious, just settled, like weight redistributing after a foundation crack is finally acknowledged. Only then did I turn back to the empty chair. I didn't sit. I let it remain empty. That was the final adjustment. The chair wasn't waiting for me to occupy it. It was waiting for everyone else to understand it no longer defined authority. The meeting continued around that absence. Motions recorded, actions assigned, boundaries enforced. Ross remained silent. No longer central. No longer deferred to. Simply present. When it ended, people stood carefully, avoiding sudden movements, as if noise might break something fragile. One by one. They left. No one brushed past me. No one offered commentary. Ross stayed seated, staring at the table like it had rewritten itself. I closed my folder and picked it up. As I turned to leave, the chair spoke once more. "We'll follow your directives." I paused. Just long enough. "Follow the agreement," I said. "It's done a better job than any of us." Outside, the hallway felt different, quieter, lighter. Not because I had arrived, but because everyone else had finally caught up. I hadn't walked in late. I had walked in exactly when the room was ready to stop pretending. The room didn't rush the moment I spoke. It absorbed it. I stood at the end of the table, folder closed, voice steady, and said exactly what the process required. I'm requesting a binding vote to void every executive action taken by Ross Bexley in the last 48 hours. No anger, no explanation, just the request. Silence followed, deliberate and heavy. The board didn't react because reaction would imply surprise. They already knew this was the only lawful next step. Pens hovered. Screens stayed dark. The chair looked down at his notes, then up at the faces around him. Measuring responsibility, a director finally asked, "All decisions, yes," I said. "Appointments, approvals, terminations, directives," another added, "including operational communications, especially those." I replied. Ross shifted in his seat. He tried to smile. The practiced one meant to reassure rooms. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can review items individually." His voice aimed for reason, but it landed as bargaining, counsel answered before I did. "The request is procedurally sound." She turned a page. "A single vote is required." Her tone was neutral, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. The chair nodded. "We'll proceed. No speeches followed. No moral debate." That was the cold part. Justice here didn't perform. It compiled. Each director cast a vote in sequence. Names recorded. Responses short. Approve. 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 The words fell like stamps. Ross leaned forward. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This exposes us." A director replied without looking at him. "It contains us." The tally completed itself. Unanimous. The chair didn't pause for effect. "The motion passes," he said. "All actions within the stated window are void." Something loosened in the room. Not relief, but alignment. The law had caught up to reality. Ross stood abruptly. "Then what am I supposed to do?" he asked. Volume rising. "Just sit here while she dismantles my authority." I met his eyes. "You already did," I said. Counsel clarified the consequence. Reading carefully, effective immediately. "Mr. Bexley's executive authority is revoked pending review." She looked at him. "You may remain as an observer." Observer. The word didn't insult. It erased. Ross opened his mouth, then stopped. He looked around, searching for a dissenting face. There were none. The board had moved past him. The chair added, "Access changes will be implemented." He glanced at legal. "Document everything." I didn't celebrate. I didn't thank anyone. I closed my folder and waited while procedure finished its work. Justice, when it's real, doesn't rush to be witnessed. As the meeting adjourned, Ross stayed seated, hands flat, eyes unfocused. His authority hadn't been taken by force. It had been removed by agreement. I turned to leave, then stopped. "For the record," I said, "this restores stability." The chair nodded. No one argued. Behind me. The room reset without him. Ahead. The company finally moved forward, governed not by impulse, but by rules everyone had already signed. Cold justice doesn't cheer when it wins. It documents and moves on. I felt no triumph, only a narrowing of chaos into order. This was never about humiliating Ross, despite his collapse making the lesson visible. It was about restoring the contract's authority over personality, ensuring that decisions carried weight because they were lawful, not loud. As directors gathered their papers, the hierarchy finished rearranging itself. Power returned to the framework that could survive scrutiny. When the door closed behind me, the vote continued to echo, not as drama, but as precedent. A reminder that governance is patient, cumulative, and indifferent to ego, and that once the record is made, it carries forward, steady and unavoidable. It also signaled an end to improvisation. From this point, every action would answer to minutes, filings, and signatures. No shortcuts, no theatrics, only consequences aligned with process, enforced quietly, exactly as written, regardless of who believed themselves indispensable within the company's enduring legal structure. They asked me to step into the side room, and Ross followed like a man clinging to the last rule he thought still applied. The door stayed open, not out of courtesy, but because nothing private could change what had already been decided. Ross didn't sit at first. He paced, rubbing his temples, trying to organize blame into something that sounded strategic. When he finally spoke, it came out rehearsed and defensive at the same time. "You have to understand the pressure I was under," he said. "The board wanted movement, investors wanted confidence, and I had to act." I listened without reacting, letting him stack excuses the way he stacked titles. Ross mistook silence for permission and kept going. "Every decision I made was for the good of the company." He insisted, "You don't build something by hesitating." I nodded once, not in agreement, but to signal that he was finished. "You weren't under pressure." "Ross," I said calmly, "you were underqualified." The words didn't rise in volume or anger. They settled, heavy and final. Ross froze, then laughed weakly, as if disbelief could soften the blow. "That's not fair," he said. I met his eyes and kept my voice level. "Fair is irrelevant." I replied, "Compliance is—" I explained nothing about feelings, only facts, because facts were all that remained. He had terminated a corporate officer without authority. He had ignored process, bypassed review, and created exposure he didn't understand. Intent did not matter, and optics never outrank signatures. Ross tried once more. Softer this time. "We can fix this quietly," he said. "No press, no filings, no permanent damage." That was when I opened my folder. Inside were 2 documents, printed cleanly, prepared long before Ross ever raised his voice. I slid them across the table, side by side. "You have 2 options," I said. The first was a clean separation. He would resign immediately, forfeit any claim to authority, and accept a non-disclosure that preserved the company and ended the matter. The second was escalation, formal findings, regulatory review, litigation, and a public record explaining exactly how his judgment failed. Neither option was emotional. Both were lawful. Only one allowed him to leave with dignity. Ross stared at the pages, breathing shallow, realizing the fight had narrowed to math and ink. He looked up once, searching my face for mercy. I offered none. This was the last courtesy I would extend. I closed the folder and waited. The choice would do the rest. Ross exhaled slowly, the sound breaking whatever illusion of command he still held. He asked how long he had. 24 hours, I said. After that. The second option proceeds without further notice. The room felt smaller as the consequences settled. Ross nodded, defeated but calculating, already measuring loss against survival. He gathered the papers as if they might change if he looked away. When he stood, he was careful, almost polite. Power had taught him manners too late. I remained where I was, listening to the building return to its ordinary sounds. This confrontation had never been about winning an argument. It was about ending improvisation. Ross left with a choice that could not be spun, delayed, or softened. I left with the certainty that the system would now behave. In the end, cruelty wasn't necessary. Precision was enough. When rules are enforced without theatrics, their consequences feel brutal anyway. Ross had wanted pressure to excuse his failures. I gave him arithmetic. The difference would decide whether his name faded quietly or endured in filings forever. Either way, the outcome was no longer his to shape. I turned off the light. Not ceremonially, but because the meeting was over. Finality doesn't announce itself. It signs, timestamps, and waits. Ross had crossed from authority into accountability. There was no appeal left in the room, only the consequences he chose next. They would last. The collapse began without spectacle, which made it satisfying. Ross Bexley exited the building flanked by security. Not rushed, not delayed, simply processed. No speeches followed him, no apologies, no final performance. The hallway watched as procedure replaced personality. He tried once to speak, then stopped when no one turned. That was the moment he understood he was finished. His badge didn't matter anymore, and neither did his voice. I watched from a distance, not to savor it, but to confirm it. Collapse is rarely loud, It's administrative. Ross was escorted past the same desks he once commanded. Now invisible to them, no one clapped, no one stared. The absence of reaction was the punishment. Minutes later, the founder's resignation arrived with surgical timing. He cited personal reasons and confidence in the board. No one replied because no one needed to. The old guard stepping aside wasn't drama. It was containment. Legal finalized the record while compliance locked the perimeter. This is how collapse looks when it's deserved. By the afternoon, an internal notice hit every inbox. Executive restructuring effective immediately. No adjectives, no reassurances, just a directive that made the truth official. Teams reorganized without panic because the uncertainty had already passed. People prefer rules to chaos. I authorized continuity steps and nothing more. No vengeance. No victory laps. The satisfaction came from watching order return. Ross's departure cleared the noise. The founder's resignation sealed the breach. What followed was work. Calendars filled with audits, not celebrations. Systems resumed responding to law instead of ego. That's the pleasure of a clean collapse. It restores proportion. When Ross passed through the lobby, he looked back once. No one followed. Security returned his badge to a tray. The doors opened and closed without ceremony. I didn't smile. Relief is quieter than triumph. The company didn't need a villain anymore. It needed structure. And it had it. As the notice propagated, the collapse completed itself. Nothing else was required. Authority had been returned to the framework that survived scrutiny. That was the win. And it held. In the days that followed, the effects multiplied across departments. Approvals flowed, controls tightened, and meetings shortened. People stopped whispering because there was nothing left to guess. Clear rules are a kindness. Ross's name disappeared from email chains and org charts with equal speed. The founder's portrait remained on the wall, but his influence did not. That distinction mattered. I reviewed the transition plan line by line. Cutting anything ornamental. Substance survived, theater didn't. Compliance scheduled briefings and documented every step. This is how you prevent relapses. When reporters called, they were referred to the notice and nothing else. Silence starved speculation. Inside, morale rose because fairness had a shape again. People don't need heroes. They need predictability. Ross had tried to govern by impulse. The company returned to governance by record. That's why the collapse felt complete. No loose ends, no lingering authority, only a clean ledger and a living process. I left the building at dusk without ceremony. Security nodded as if we had always agreed. Outside, nothing celebrated the change. That was appropriate. Collapses that matter don't ask for applause. They leave behind a company that can finally breathe. By the next morning, the notice had done its work. Executive restructuring was no longer an announcement. It was reality. Ross was gone. The founder was gone. And the rules remained. That arithmetic felt right. I closed the file, satisfied not by ruin, but by restoration. Complete collapse isn't loud. It's final. And this one held. The company moved forward under rules that could withstand scrutiny. That endurance, not spectacle, is what lasts. I welcomed the quiet that followed. It meant the system was working. Nothing else needed to fall. Everything necessary already had. That is the satisfaction of a collapse done right. It leaves strength standing, and it ends the noise. Completely finished. I returned without an announcement. Because owners don't need reintroductions. The lobby looked the same, but the posture of the place had changed. People didn't look past me anymore. They made space. I wasn't back as staff. I was back as structure. I signed documents, not timesheets. I reviewed safeguards, not performance goals. Legal asked if I wanted the clause amended, softened, or retired. I shook my head. Leave it. I said. It worked. There was no bitterness left to spend. The satisfaction came from knowing the system could now defend itself. The company didn't belong to a title or a temper. It belonged to rules that remembered. As I closed the final folder, Someone asked how it felt to be fired and return. I answered with the truth. Calm and final, you can fire an employee. You can't fire an owner. I left the clause untouched, protecting the company. I didn't learn this lesson in a seminar or from a motivational poster on a break room wall. I learned it standing quietly while someone louder tried to erase me. What stayed with me wasn't the shock or the anger, but the realization that real power is built long before it's needed. It lives in preparation, in patience, in choices that look boring until the day they save you. There's a hard truth we don't like to admit. The world often rewards confidence over competence, noise over substance. That can feel unfair, even crushing. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. It's about knowing your worth even when others don't recognize it, and protecting yourself in ways that don't require shouting. If you're listening to this and you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside because you didn't fit someone else's idea of power, I want you to pause for a second. Ask yourself, what quiet leverage do I already have? Is it knowledge, integrity, experience, preparation, or the trust you've built over time? And if you were placed in the same situation, would you react loudly or would you be ready? I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? A busy office, your car, a quiet room at home, wherever you are. You're part of why stories like this matter. If this story made you reflect, even a little, consider subscribing to the channel. One simple subscription, one like, one comment can help this message reach someone who feels powerless today. By sharing this video, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping someone realize they're not invisible, and that preparation and integrity still matter. Sometimes, doing the right thing really is that simple. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.